So there's nowhere you can go. There's no information you can get. There's no conversations you can listen into to find out what the Chinese are going to do because it's all in one guy's head. So the normal things that you would do indirectly is like, you look at the economic issues, you look at the military distribution, and you guess what someone in his position would do. None of that's relevant because we don't know what he knows. He's destroyed all the lines of information to himself, and yet at the same time established himself as the only decision maker. You can't climb into someone's head when you don't know what they know. And so we're in a complete black box. All I can say is that because he has done this, the Chinese system is not functioning as you would expect a nation state to function, economically, strategically, in anything. And so we have been seeing ever more interesting policy failures across the system, whether it's in housing or in finance or in supply chains or in diplomacy. The whole thing is showing the early stages of system failure. And so that 10-year horizon I keep talking about, that's actually the best case scenario. That assumes you've got a government that's doing mitigation all the way down. And we don't have that right now. There's not a lot that we can do here. We can't stop in Ukraine because we just face a bigger war a few months later. North Korea is a bit of a black box itself. And so we're always going to need some sort of missile defense there. And the Chinese system has become a question mark. And, barring preemptively carpet nuking these places, which I am not recommending, your only option is to make sure that if something does get flung, you're in a position to intercept it. Missile defense. If it becomes obvious that the United States is going to pick favorites but not put boots on the ground and is not interested in a broader regional strategic picture, we just pick friends and go from it. Then anyone who is not one of those friends, whether they're friends or foes, good or bad countries, nukes are really the only option that they can really have. So I'm not so much worried about nukes in Iran. To be perfectly blunt, this technology is nearly a century old, and if Iran was capable of doing it, they would have done it already. I'm worried about Poland. I'm worried about Sweden. I'm worried about South Korea and Taiwan and Japan. I'm worried about Saudi Arabia. Countries that have the technical or financial means to either build one themselves or go out and buy one. And if they think the United States really isn't concerned with their security, and for the most part, we are not, then they're going to have to do something themselves. And that's a very different world. And that's where we'll be within 10 years. The world that we are just now leaving, the globalized system, we created that at the end of World War II in order to combat the Cold War. We basically created this system that provided so many huge economic benefits that everyone wanted to join. We would have to do something on that scale again. And I don't think we can do that without a significant change in the way Americans view everything. Coming out of World War II, we understood the cost of global instability in our bones. And so there was a tolerance for international involvement. We didn't have that after World War I. We had to lose 500,000 soldiers to be sufficiently shocked into involving ourselves. And so we're at this moment of political transition in the United States. Maybe the next transition is going to be more internationally minded, but it's hard to see the logic for it. The North American economy is doing very well. And in the transition we're going to see over the next 10 years, it's probably going to double the size of the industrial plant. I mean, that's a huge growth story, but it doesn't involve the Eastern Hemisphere. So it's difficult for me to see people on the left or the right embracing the sort of commitment that would be necessary to hold history at bay everywhere else. And then, of course, if we do decide we want to do that, the question is whether we can. This isn't 1970. We're not the only country with a navy anymore. There's only 2 countries in the world that have the capacity of doing that today on a regional basis. So France could do it in far Western Europe. Turkey could do it in Southeastern Europe and the upper parts of the Middle East, and they could have spheres of influence that have their own rules and their own security system that could work for them. But that's it. The Japanese found a way to get along with the Trump administration and the Biden administration. Japanese are the only people who figured out how to work with both sides of the American political aisle. So what could have been an independent sphere is now part of ours. And obviously, we're going to look out for the Western Hemisphere ourselves. And that's it. Keep in mind that our military, in terms of the firepower it can throw is several times more powerful than the combined navies of everyone else. And the second most powerful navy in the world is Japan, and now they're on board. And the third most powerful is Britain, and if they can ever figure out Brexit, they'll probably be on board too. No one else can try. Oh, I'm perfectly willing of dumping on the United States when we do something stupid, and we do things that are stupid a lot. But when you look at geography, the United States has the best geography in the world and significant insulation from everyone else. And if you look at demographics, the US is the healthiest demography in the rich world. And even if we keep aging at our current point, we're not going to reach a Chinese or a German style problem before 2060, probably 2070. So just playing the numbers and playing the math, this is the place to be. We're not perfect. Dear God, we're not perfect. And I think Churchill said it best, is you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other options. Ukraine is easily an order of magnitude more important than Gaza. So Gaza, for me, is, I hate to say this, especially if you're Israeli, I apologize, but it's a distraction. It's not a major issue. It's major for Israel. It's not major for anyone else. The future of Ukraine will determine what is possible in the Western Alliance, not just NATO and the EU, but the whole structure of the region and how Russia dies. Because if Ukraine falls, Russia will come for Europe. And if Ukraine succeeds, then we have to deal with the breakup of the Russian system, which will be much messier than the breakup of the Soviet system. And an order of magnitude more important than that is how China disintegrates, because it is the workshop of the world. And we've got $35 trillion of sunk costs and industrial plant in that continent or in that country, most of which is going to have to be rebuilt somewhere else. And how that process happens is going to determine the human condition for the next 50 years. I think he has sufficiently consolidated power with his own system to not have to worry about assassinations. And by Russian standards, he's in great health because he doesn't drink. So I would expect him to continue to run the Russian Federation until the day the Russian Federation dissolves, whether that is a year from now or 30 years from now. He spent a lot of his last 22 years as president basically dismantling the methods by how someone might rise up through the system. So he's got his inner circle, he's got his outer circle. The two of them combined are under 130 people, and that is everyone within the Russian system who is a decision maker. There's no one coming up from below. He hasn't been as thorough of purging the system as, say, Xi has, because Xi is one. There's no one else. But Putin has done a very good job of making sure that those 130 people think of him as the person who ultimately decides everything that matters. And they know that there is no one else among the 130 that could even theoretically take Putin's place, with one exception. There's a guy by the name of Igor Sechin who runs Rosneft, the state oil company, used to be an arms smuggler during the Soviet period. He might have the guts and the brains to do it. But if there's one thing that the other 129 agree on, it's that Igor Sechin is an asshole, and he would probably be killed within 24 hours of offing Putin.
Himself.
Yeah, well, I mean, he comes from the security services. So intelligence is in his blood, and that's where his strongest allies are. And his second strongest allies are in organized crime. So if he wants somebody gone, he either has the official state do it or some irregular group do it. And it's, at least from a leadership point of view, it's been